psychyogi.org. Circle theory, a model proposed by Professor David Canter of geographical profiling pertaining to offender behaviour and the locality of their crimes. The theory assumes that an offender's home or base of operations will be central to their crimes. The underlying theory behind Canter's circle theory is the criminal consistency hypothesis. This is that criminals will display consistency and similarity between their crimes. For example, a highly skilled bank robber is highly unlikely to commit street-level robberies after robbing banks. We would at least expect that the bank robber continues to either rob banks or similar institutions. Okay, this map has purple stars on it, and each star represents a hypothetical crime. The outer circle is the outer perimeter of those crimes. It could increase if there's more crimes that are committed afterwards, but for now this is the outer circle, and the criminal is expected to live somewhere within the circle. The smaller circle is a narrowed down version of where the criminal is likely to live, because they're more likely to live in the centre of the circle depending on the crimes, and we'll get to that in the next slide. Okay, so Canter also proposed that the crimes have essentially gravity. So there's 3 crimes near Hampstead Heath, which would move the inner circle closer to Hampstead Heath because there's more crimes. So we would expect that the criminal lives closer to Hampstead Heath, hence why the circle's moved. This suggests that the criminal knows the area quite well, which is why there's more crimes being committed in that area. Canter further identified 2 types of criminal: marauders and commuters. Marauders commit crimes around the area in which they live, and commuters commit crimes around an area that they have commuted to and may have some familiarity with. For example, their crimes could be committed near a workplace, their local supermarket, or a friend's house. A distinguishing factor of commuters is their crimes tend to be closer together. So if you look at the right circle, the purple stars again represent crimes. Notice how they're very close together. This is an example of the commuter model. The circle on the left is where the criminal is likely to live, and that area is likely to be very similar to the area in which the crimes are committed in terms of architecture and ethnicity and other factors. They're likely to commit crimes in areas which they're familiar with because of the spatial consistency hypothesis, which we'll get onto later, but they will at least want to be familiar with an area, if not feel familiar, hence why they will have similar features to where they actually live. This is the marauder model. Notice how the crimes are spread out more, and there's only one circle because the criminal is committing crimes in an area where they live. The reason the crimes are more spread out is because it suggests that the criminal has a greater familiarity with the area. If we just go back to the commuter model a minute, notice how far apart, close together those crimes are. Another feature of commuters is that they don't try to hide their identity because they don't believe they're going to be recognised, because they're not in an area in which other people will recognise them because they're not a local to that area. Marauders, on the other hand, will try and hide their identity, and the fact that their crimes will be wider apart is what distinguishes the 2 different models. So these models are derived from the spatial consistency hypothesis, and the criminal consistency hypothesis is further divided into 2 subtypes, one of which is the spatial consistency hypothesis, which you've just lightly touched on. So if we look at the interpersonal consistency first, this suggests that the criminals will have a level of social and sexual competency which will be displayed consistently throughout their crimes. For example, a person who is highly socially competent may seduce a person into coming with them, whereupon the criminal will commit their crime. A famous example of this is the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who would convince young men to come back to his home, and when the young men tried to leave, Dahmer would kill them. And secondly, we have the spatial consistency hypothesis, which refers to a criminal's familiarity with an area. Simply, you would only commit a crime in an area which you know. If you're going to commit a crime, you'd at least want to know how you're going to get away from the area. So you'd have to have some knowledge of the area. And this is where the spatial consistency is found. A criminal may commit a crime in an area which they think is familiar, even if it's not actually familiar in terms of they know the area. So an example of this is Adrian Babb. He was a rapist between January 1986 and March 1988 in Birmingham. He committed 7 rapes of elderly ladies in 3 tower blocks. Now, using circle theory for these 3 tower blocks yielded no idea of where Babb was likely to live, because in the middle of the tower blocks there was nothing. There was no buildings, nothing. There was just empty land. So Canter realised that he must be commuting. And so they had to look for areas which were similar, and they actually did find him in another tower block which had similar ethnic makeup. And this clearly shows that Babb had some spatial consistency within his crimes, because he would have been familiar with the layout of tower blocks themselves. If you've enjoyed this Psych Yogi video, why not subscribe to keep up with all the latest videos?